and so have always been in touch with some of the more dodgy components of connection to life, because it's not only my shin that I can Reiki or someone else's headache, and other energy work that I've learned since then. It's worked on the dog, worked on the horse, worked on the cat, worked on the deer. And some of these things they start to bridge into sort of, I don't know, in our modern age, we can chalk it up to like quantum effects. Like, this is not bound by time or space even, which really flips people's lids.
Welcome to the Enchanted Earth podcast, where you will hear stories of nature with the power to transform our lives. These sacred stories are begging to be shared now. So listen in as my guest today shares one of their own. So welcome, everybody. Today we have with us George Bumann, and let me tell you a little bit about George. He's an animal language expert, artist, and naturalist living with his wife, son, and black Labrador at the northern entrance of Yellowstone National Park. With a background in wildlife ecology and field experience spanning 4 decades across the globe, Bumann explores the lives of his wild neighbors and tells their stories through teachings and bronze sculpture. His very first book was just published, called Eavesdropping on Animals: What We Can Learn from Wildlife Conversations. Welcome, George.
Thank you, Maureen. Thanks for having me.
Just hearing the name of your book, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to see if you can come on. It's just a wonderful title. And it works so well with this podcast, The Enchanted Earth. So I love that image behind you. Wow. I assume that's Yellowstone.
It is. It's a photo backdrop, I have to confess, but at least a photo my wife took, Jenny. So we do a lot of online interviews and programming. So we've tried to keep it Yellowstone-ish, if you can say that.
Yeah, so your website is called A Yellowstone Life. Obviously, you are right by Yellowstone, so this is your home.
It is. It's a place a lot of people visit, but there's very few of us who actually get to live here, either in the park or adjacent to it. And, a place that's as well known as Yellowstone gets a lot of headlines and media coverage, but, our real motivation is to kind of get beneath those layers and into the lived experiences of what it's really like to be here and the things you really get to experience beyond those highlights.
It is a magical place. I'm very lucky to have visited probably about 25 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And we actually took the northern entrance into the park. So I'm very familiar with that land, and it was really magical.
Yeah, it has a draw to it, and it's no coincidence that there's, officially I think it's close to 30 tribal affiliations who had historic connections here, but the list probably is actually closer to 50 or so, and it holds a very special place in all of those cultures and within ours.
Yeah, just beautiful and magical. But I understand that you haven't lived in this magical place your whole life. So tell me a little bit about your childhood.
Sure. I grew up in upstate New York, actually. I grew up, if some folks know Oneida, the name Oneida Lake or Oneida Silver, that colony was on the same lake I grew up on. And at a very early age, because there really weren't a lot of kids around where I actually grew up, on the street I grew up on, Dead End Road. The lake and the wild denizens were my real companions. And my mom is a sculptor. And so I grew up around the art, I grew up around nature, and those were my two passions. And thought pursuing that outdoor life and just anything that would keep me outside and in contact was what I I strove for, and all the way through a master's in wildlife ecology, only to realize that when you have a graduate degree in that kind of field, like many, you work in an office, and that was not what I signed up for. And ironically enough, it was when we moved to Yellowstone or afterward, just feeling so many things, experiencing so many things that just did not fit in words, that, you know, I was just struggling what to do. I thought I would do illustration work, and that field was going the way of most things in the digital age. And really striving to figure out what was I supposed to contribute here. And that's when my father actually got sick, but out of that came working with my mom again, and the sculpture came back into the picture. So I melded my two passions, and that's what's ended me up where I am now.
So, did you have any particular, I mean, you talk about this kind of pivot point in your life and your realization that you need to go back to the arts, and that is a way to kind of like feed your soul in a way that you hadn't been able to, I guess, follow before. Was there any particular maybe catalyst out in nature that made you realize that this is how you need to go?
I think it was the inner nature. The outer nature is always there, but I think of the golden years as a young person, and it was like 7 to 9, when you were like just completely innocent and free. And I'd be out fishing on the docks, of the lake shore I grew up on. And that was just like, when I think back, that was like the ideal. That was heaven. And after, hitting 12, 13, and you sort of become enculturated into whatever the prevailing MO of your society is. And that really didn't do well for me. And it took me going through all the things I thought I should be doing, and coming out the other end realizing, no, what I had when I was 6, 7, 8, 10, that was the good stuff. How do I bring that back in? And so I just started pursuing that again more deeply, and letting the outside in more deeply to fill up the well that I needed to top off.
Mm, wonderful. I was watching a TEDx talk from Bozeman, and that was about 10, almost 10 years ago. And
Yeah.
you said something that really resonated with me, and I'm sure people listening to this talk, that one gift that we can give ourselves is to be conscious of this beauty of this planet.
Yeah.
And two, you said to actually share it, share that awareness and that consciousness in whatever medium you're drawn to. And of course, yours is sculpture. And immediately I'm like, well, I am so not a visual artist. I'm more of a writer. So yeah, that really resonated with me.
Yeah, it's something to be in the presence of wild nature and really feel the things it has to offer us. Like living here as long as we have, we've gotten to know individual wild animals and followed them their whole lives, and known them generationally, like the mother, the grandmother, the daughters of wolves, or known individual elk for years and years at a time. And once that door opens to you, you can't not see or offer these others that you encountered by chance the same possibilities. And that is just so rich. It's just incredible, honestly, that the lessons they have to offer us. And I think to keep those to yourself is first off, it's not human nature. We are social animals. We like to share, and we learn
Yes.
a great deal secondhand. And whether someone is writing a piece that we're reading or telling us a story, those are really special things that have kind of gotten distorted a bit, I feel like, with the modern age. We are still wired to like chocolate. and sugar and greasy food and all these things that make us human were really, part of that is the story, and to tell this story so that we all stand more firmly on the shoulders of those before us.
Yeah, I mean, the stories that we have in our modern world are that we're separate from nature and we're just like observing. And that animals are just, you know, not conscious. They're just animals.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the difficulty I had with my science training, which I loved and I learned so much, and it's a huge part of who I am, but it also didn't really fill the void that I felt that existed there between me and the natural world. Like I craved the lived experience of that. In science you have the subject and the studier of that subject, and the two don't cross. But in fact, they do. It's a fallacy that they don't, and that the observer doesn't affect the observed. And I just, as a lived experience, a human being, I love that connection that I had as a kid. Following the beavers around in the creek along the swamp, and the seeing the mink, skirting along, and the water snakes hanging up in the root balls of the overturned trees on the lake shore. Like I don't still have really words to describe what those offered me, but you feel it. And I don't want to feel that. I wanted to continue feeling that, not just look at it at a distance or under a microscope and say, oh, how neat. Here's the statistics that describe this. Like, no, that's not good enough. Yeah,
That's
we need to be
right.
whole ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you have a story you'd like to share with us?
Oh man, there's so many. Every day has some. Like yesterday, literally we went for a walk, and there's been some elk hunting going on. Tribal hunters are exerting their treaty rights and hunting out here, and they got a few elk, and so lots of ravens and magpies and eagles. And we went on our normal dog walk, and here's a raven, a deceased raven that, through my ecology training and tracking experience, know and figured out that it was killed by an eagle. But what's the symbolism? It's interesting. Just you very rarely see a dead raven or crow or magpie even, and the magpies were just talking up a storm, like they do when there's a predator around or when they're having one of their own funerals. And this turned out to be a funeral for a raven. And then that night, this gorgeous great horned owl landed on the curve sign right before our driveway as we were coming back. But a more revealing story probably is one I included in the book, about mama deer. It's so much about relations. All of what we get to live is craving, but also experiencing relationships that go on for a long time in many cases. And we've gotten to know many deer along the way, and in a ride around our house. We've one particular deer that we got to know for a number of years. We just dubbed Mama Deer because she was such a great mom to all her fawns, and she would actually stick around a lot of times in the summer, whereas a lot of her herd mates would go into the high country. And one particular spring, she had triplets, which in this country is very unusual. And where you are in the east, it's not unusual for white-tailed deer that are really well fed on all that green grass to have triplets or even quadruplets in some cases. But it's different out here in the dry west. And but she did it, and she was such a good mom, and she husbanded them and steward them around our place and the surrounding landscape. And but that next winter was a really hard one, and we developed this relationship with her. Like she would freely walk with the fawns between me and the front rail of our decking to the house, a distance. I might sit in the yard 30 feet tops, 20 feet, and she would walk in that space between the house and me freely and feed. It's just and really in the book, a lot of people are looking for ways to get back to that. And so it's recommending ways to just, when you're starting out, the things to look for to know that the animal is fearful or confident and feels safe. And she was definitely feeling safe around us.
Yeah.
And we got to know her and the personality of the fawns. But as I said, the winter got rough that year. And one by one, we started seeing her lose the fawns until they were all gone. And then she disappeared. And we didn't know if because we're living literally between the park and the national forest. And although hunting is not allowed in Yellowstone, it is everywhere on the national forests. So we didn't know if she'd been hit by a car, she'd been taken by a hunter, a mountain lion, wolves. She was just gone. And that was until early spring, late winter, she showed up at our house. And she was just skin and bones. She looked terrible, but it was her. You could tell it was Mama Deer. And she had a patch of fur, several inches long, missing from her lower back. I don't know if she was hit by a vehicle and was still just suffering from the consequences. We didn't ever know. And she was in a really, really bad state, like so far that feeding an animal in that state, which we don't generally do at all anyway. We feed birds, but we've delved into it just enough to know that, it's generally not a great thing to feed wildlife for a ton of reasons. And in her case, she probably would have died from that nutrition. Her body was just that taxed. But she literally was in her 11th hour. And of all the places she could go when she was in that situation, she came back to our house and literally laid down on the welcome mat to the front door. And we have a glass door. And so for 3 nights, I just literally sat there on the other side of that glass, just inches from her. Just to be with her. Just to bear witness and be there. As sad as that was, it was so incredibly touching that in her last hours, of all the places she could go, it was the safety she knew with us that she came back to. We never fed her. This was purely something built on mutual trust.
Yeah.
And, we could walk by her with our dogs. I'd kind of put my hands on the dogs' backs just as a visual gesture of, being sensitive to her needs. And she would stand there, and sometimes we'd go within 10 or 12 feet. She'd let us walk right by on the driveway. And we were friends.
Yeah.
This friendship was one that spanned the species divide. And the 4th night, she went under the decking, and that's where she expired. And you don't forget things like that easily. And every time we see a deer here, you can't not offer them the same possibilities that they too have fears and needs and hopes and can trust and can relate beyond just to their own kind. And so it's hard. Death is part of life. And one thing from being around wild animals, you realize is they don't see death as an end in the way we do. I think we have a very distorted and unfortunate relationship with death that they do not. And so that way continue to teach us that whether they're injured and they still carry on and they still care for their kids and they still have to do X, Y, and Z, despite these incredible injuries. I've had the chance to, there's a wolf I knew for years named 302. He's been the subject of a couple films and books even. And Um, they actually retrieved his body after it was killed. He was killed by other wolves, and they hired a gentleman out of Alaska to come rearticulate his skeleton for the museum here in Yellowstone. And I just found out about it by chance, and so assisted. I've done a few reconstructions like that myself. And having known that wolf and watched his behavior, but then to look at his skeleton and see the broken bones, the broken ribs, the shattered toes, the bite marks of other canines on and into his skull, the bone infections around his teeth and his jaw, like you would never have known any of that watching him. And that's just that wild spirit perseveres in ways that we often don't. We've padded ourselves against the realities of life, and not always to the better. And so when you see that and when you encounter that in the truly wild beings that still share this place with us, you can't deny it. You can't write it off, and you can't help but live your own life differently because of their influence.
Yeah. It is so true that, being in touch at a more intimate level with nature, it just brings up the metaphor of the seasons and the cycles of life. And it reminds us of that because our modern lives keep us insulated from that. Like you said, we're our relationship with the cycles of life is really distorted.
And that's why we're doing all the things we're doing to the planet.
Exactly.
You would do it differently if you knew, if you had a relationship and you see what choices you individually make. I think if there's one thing I hope people get from the book, it's that you can have these relationships with these more than human beings, but the things that they share with you take the environmental crisis out of headlines and big media messages and into a very personal relationship. And that was one of the things that bothered me from my science background is we have this prevailing perception that experts, scientists, doctors, what have you, have all the answers because they have all the data, and data is not the answer. Data is a tool, and we clearly have plenty of data on what we're doing to the planet, but we lack the feeling behind what we've created. Even something as simple as letting your dog out off leash in the morning is running the deer out of a place they dearly need to be. Mowing the lawn in that spot is going right over the cottontail's nest. Cutting down the dead tree is depriving the woodpeckers of a place to feed their young or house them. So as we start to pay attention to wild conversations, they give us our own personal channel through which to find the answers. And those answers, to me, are the ones that are most powerful because of the relationships that develop. You can't not want to see them prosper. You can't not want to take care when your deer, your rabbit, your woodpeckers are in danger. That's also part of human nature, and I think we need to put it back into better use.
It requires a few things. I think people are either unwilling or unable to provide is one, mindfulness and awareness or presence. Even living in an urban or suburban environment, we have an abundance of wildlife that we can watch, like the birds and the squirrels and possums, and we have a few possums around that we encounter every few years or so in the middle of the night. So there's this wildlife if we're just open our eyes to it. But like you said too, it's allowing ourselves to feel, opening the heart, and
Mm-hmm.
really allowing that in. And I think a lot of people, I think many of us are overwhelmed by what's happened on this planet, overwhelmed with what could I possibly do that would change anything, that they kind of close off their heart because they don't want to feel.
Yeah. And that's a natural thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have pets, and we get another pet after the previous one passes. Why?
Yeah.
Because as hard as that was when we lost Jasper, our black lab before Hobbs, and Casey, it crushed me. And put off getting another dog for a long time because that hurts. But then when you open up and allow that what you share makes it worth it. Even something as simple as paying attention to how you walk out the door. I envy the Eastern biodiversity that you have even in those urban and suburban settings. Like, this is not a barrier where you live to encountering and having meaningful relationships with the more than human. We live next to Yellowstone, but this is not a Yellowstone thing. It's not a big charismatic wildlife thing. Like, something as simple as paying attention how you exit your door. You talk about seeing things with your own eyes, but listening, there's this whole conversation going on in the natural world that we are outside of right now. Our ancestors weren't, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But we can re-enter that to know where the possum is right now, in many cases, to know that there's a
Oh,
hawk coming before it ever shows up, to know that there's an owl perched in the deepest, darkest evergreen tree that you could possibly find right there, right now. Do you want to go see it? And that paying attention to those conversations and opening up to that broader community makes it easy for us to find that relationship again. So when you walk out the door, something that all of us can do right now is probably within minutes, maybe, of listening to the podcast episode, pay attention how you exit the door. I don't think any of us really often think of that. We burst out the door to go to the grocery store, we go to the car, and we don't realize this huge explosion of, the fear factor of wildlife being confronted with, oh my gosh, there's a human in our presence. And they just all take off and they talk about it. And they're talking about not just the human, they're talking about you, different from your spouse, different from your roommate, different from, the neighbor and the UPS guy. Like, there's a specificity in an individual level of relationship in nature across species that we've overlooked for too long. And the beauty of that is when you start to turn the doorknob slowly and you open it up a crack and you open it up a little wider and you realize that, oh, the rabbit hasn't ducked under the fence yet, and the birds that are feeding in the grass in the yard might pick their head up, but they haven't flushed. And they realize, oh, it's you. And you've been doing this for a few weeks now, and we know that you mean well, or you're just not here to scare the tar out of everybody. That door, the metaphorical door, opens wider, right? They come to see you as an individual, you come to see them as individuals, and that's where it all starts. You can't not help but want to see them do well. And there's things like that throughout our day. I often ask my students here in Yellowstone, how often have you just gone and sat in nature for an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, and done nothing but observe? that almost never happens these days. And the result is, principally, you've never seen the area around your home or where you walk your dog or where you go beachcombing in anything other than a state of abject fear towards a human. It usually takes 40 to 45 minutes for the surrounding environment to relax around you. So going and sitting still allows that community to resume its normal behavior. We've never seen that. So how would we know that our impacts are just so incredibly outsized? You know, a, a sparrow will jump, or a wren will jump, in accordance to the threat that's encountering it, right? A weasel, they'll go up, 3-4 feet. If it's a house cat, they'll go up 5 or 6 feet. If it's, a fox or something like that, they'll go up just high enough to be out of the reach of that predator. But what do they go all the way to the tree tops for? Us, modern humans, because we were just so in our heads and so scary that they aren't taking any chances. And when you realize that by either paying attention to literally how you walk out the door or making a point to sit on a park bench and watch the squirrels and the birds and keep your damn phone as far away from you as possible, undistracted, do you see these things start to unfold? And then you get to feel what you need to, what the earth needs us to feel in order to start doing the right things.
That is, I love that exercise or that challenge that you gave us. It's, I, I've heard the term sit spot. They use it in forest bathing therapy a lot. And so it sounds like kind of a prolonged sit spot.
Yeah. Yeah. And my friend John Young kind of coined it for a lot of people in the modern era, is a tool that he was taught by his mentor to really get a feel for what's going on around him. And it's so powerful, and it's even more powerful when you do it together. So you do it with your friends, do it with your kids, do it with your grandkids, and space out just far enough. You don't have to be any more than 20 feet from each other, 15 feet. But it's astonishing when you do that, how so often you get little snippets. This bird was doing this over here, and I don't know what the heck it was. I don't know. It's easy to blow off. But when your grandson is sitting over there and all of a sudden he's like, oh my gosh, Grandpa, the hawk came right through. And that's what then the bird started doing that. And it makes this whole landscape alive again, in that you realize nothing's random. Everything is intimately tied into each other. And that you become so, even at the initial stage, just through listening, the magpies are upset about something. I don't know. There might be a predator. There might be a bobcat over there, or it could be maybe a deceased magpie. Oh gosh, the other day it was a dead raven. That we could have found even if it wasn't right on the path, but we would have known something was going on. And so you can populate an area of, in some cases, many square miles with an awareness that is beyond your own sensory abilities. Through them, you hear what they hear, you see what they see, you smell what they smell through reading that behavior. And pretty soon, like us here at home, we can know that 2.5 miles across the upper Yellowstone Valley on a ridge in Yellowstone is a wolf somewhere. You only have to get home, get your binoculars or a spotting scope, and look for the alarmist. And in this case, it's often a coyote yelling wolf. And they very much do have a language. A lot of species do, although, we've gathered all these only human traits together for ourselves. And the more we start looking in the natural world, we realize we're not that special. There's almost nothing left that is purely human. Animals are using tools. They're making art. They're using language. They have culture. They pass on the culture. It's like get over this and otherness and accept the togetherness. And yeah, oh, there's the wolf right there, just like the coyote said. So this can be done about the peregrine that's nesting near your place in Melbourne or New York City or Harrisburg, PA. It can be done about the possum. It can be done with the fox that you've seen tracks when it snowed that tiny bit a few times each year, but you've never seen. Your cat or dog gets out. You can follow them through the bird language and the communication system of the wild.
Oh, yeah.
And as a result, you become part of it. And
Yeah.
that's what we need. We need to be part of nature again.
There's just such a playfulness and joy when you step into that world.
Oh yeah. You don't want to be anywhere else after that.
No.
And when the stresses of life are just crushing you and the office work is stacking up and the to-do list and oh, relatives are coming and they want just go outside. And Jenny and I always say it's always worth it. 10 minutes right now. You need to go outside. You need to go for a walk. 10 minutes. And it often turns into 20 or 40 and you come back refreshed, renewed. It's like fertilizer. The crap of the world just comes down upon you. And when you are out there, you can dish it off. And when you do, it's like any other fertilizer. It creates
Right.
something beautiful. It creates something better. And you come away from that thinking, my gosh, our ancestors they lived this 24/7. And we only get it in these little snippets. So let's take these snippets and make them more than snippets. It will be much better off for it. And so will the environment.
So, by sharing these stories, what do you think is the importance of sharing these stories like you did in your book?
First off, it's to let people they're not alone. We have this inner drive, this inner mechanism that is looking for meaning in that scent on the breeze. We are looking for connection and relevance to that fox when you finally do see it turning and looking over its shoulder because its youngsters are following. That's the context in which we are human. It's the one in which we evolve. So telling these stories lets others know this is still alive in us. This is still part of who we are. You are not alone. And we need to share our stories with each other to of course, learn and advance, but also to find community. But a community that's just not together, a community that's deeply connected to the really important things of life, not just what we cook up as Homo sapiens. And story is important because it is our original superfood. We really just crave a good story. The best stories, no matter the medium, film. I had a chance to help with a Pixar film that's coming out I think next year. And from the original time, we saw Finding Nemo. As an artist, I'm looking at this as an artist and a storyteller. My grandfather was a master storyteller. He would never say that, but he was. He truly was, and he was my hero. And so through the art and the storytelling, like watching Nemo, I'm like, damn it, these people did their homework. This is really good. And a knockoff to a good show or the sequel to the show you really enjoyed, they're never as good because they're operating on a financial platform, a monetary platform, instead of the 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 real substance of what makes life really rich. It's not money. It's experience. It's what you put your time into. And to be in the presence of someone who tells an unbelievable story who paints with a saint's brush.
Mm.
You hover back to it again and again like a moth to a light in ways you don't always know yourself, but you know there's something special there. You keep going back and you keep going back. And maybe you realize in the end what it is, but that's the beauty of how we're able to tell stories as human beings. If that's our one superpower, that might be it, is we can tell them with mathematics. We can tell them with a written word. We can tell them in a dance performance or a piece of textiles or a sculpture or you name it. We are sharing in these ways. And the arts are the ultimate. They're parallel to the sciences, but they're to my mind, the ultimate problem-solving exercise, as it involves both understanding the outside world, why am I drawn to that, but the inside world, what is my motivation for this? And so it seamlessly integrates these two in a way that breaks down those barriers, that puts us back in communion with that which our ancestors would say, like, yeah, duh, this is amazing. This is really cool. It sustains us, and it is the source of our spirituality, our lives, our livelihood, our happiness. It's all there, and it's all free. And in a world that values things based upon how much money they're worth or generate, we've lost that real sense of value. It's not how much money is associated with it. And in nature, we take the trillions of dollars of GDP that the services of the earth provide for granted. And yet, when we start following these threads, one by one, that bird call over to, oh my gosh, there's a hawk perched there, and it's got a mouse in its talons, and you pull the thread the other way. There aren't words for it. But the feeling is the real creation, the feeling within us, and that burning desire to share it and tell the story is I think what you're doing here with the podcast. It's letting people, they're not alone. There's beauty and amazement everywhere, and that it's only a step outside the door or even just an open window away.
Yes.
Think of all the things you do in a day. How many of them can you do outside? You can answer the phone and do phone calls outside all day long. And I have friends that do this. Other people that have had hip surgery, and literally just opening the window has taken them all kinds of places. So it's more accessible, and it's free. It's like infinite free passes to the gym. And your psychotherapist, or your counselor, they're out there. They reflect back to you what you give to them. And so you see yourself reflected back at you through the robin, through the chipmunk, in a way that is gentle and yet transformative.
I am wondering, is there a story that you maybe didn't share in your book or were a little reluctant to share in your book?
I held a lot back. I'll be honest, because I'm not even talking like the 5 or 6 chapters, complete chapters that we chucked out for editorial reasons, but I'll say it this way. My mom started in nursing and quickly became disenchanted with it because of, what the medical system has been and still is. Very good, people, well-intentioned, but for her, it was not healing the whole human being. And so, among other things, she learned Reiki. And at around age 12 or so, I learned Reiki because, hey, whatever the heck this is, I fall off my bike, I heal up faster, I get kicked in soccer, I'm better, quicker, all these things. You just use them. You didn't question them. It's like flipping the light switch on the wall. It's like, how many of us really understand electricity? Yet we're using it. So this was kind of one of those things. And so I went through, by the time I was 15, I'd done like the master level Reiki training and that sort of stuff. And so have always been in touch with some of the more dodgy components of connection to life, because it's not only my shin that I can Reiki or someone else's headache, and other energy work that I've learned since then. It's worked on the dog, worked on the horse, worked on the cat, worked on the deer. And some of these things don't, they start to bridge into sort of, I don't know, in our modern age, we can chalk it up to like quantum effects. Like, this is not bound by time or space even, which really flips people's lids. And I didn't include it in the book because it's meant as an introductory thing to get people out of this rut that we're in,
Yes.
to something better. But going too far into what the world actually is capable of, can also be a turnoff. But so, we had this gorgeous, gorgeous little mule deer fawn that got hit by a car, and Jenny found it in the ditch, when she was walking the dog, and it stayed in the ditch. We said, well, let's leave it alone. Maybe it just has a hurt leg and it'll heal up and it'll get better. But it stayed there, and it stayed there. And it was such a beautiful little deer. It was just, every time we did sort of walk by at enough of a distance, but close enough to be able to see into the ditch and see it, just beautiful perky ears and these eyes with the light of life inside them, and just amazing. And so I would check in with her. I actually made a really concerted effort to check in with her through that vibe, and could tell that it was her lower back. She had something very bad wrong with her spine, not legs. And sadly, there was no recovering from that. And one of the real difficult things that people don't realize living in the country we do is it comes with some beautiful and amazing and awe-inspiring upsides, but some very tragic and difficult downsides. And when I realized that, and I went over and looked, and I came home and got the gun and saved her the last of the trauma and I don't know, that's what I told myself. I still don't know if that was exactly the right decision, but in fact, yeah, she had down around L3 or 4, her back was broken, she couldn't move. And you have enough of those experiences, you know that there's not a randomness or gee whiz, that's a interesting coincidence. The coincidences start to fall away, and the anecdotes start to turn into data. And how the animals, there's things they operate on that we don't, and by listening to them, we grasp a little of their UV vision, their ability to smell to parts per billion, their ability to see heat signatures, their ability to do all of these things that we cannot and never will, that are their superpowers. And yet there's these other ones that reside within us that we discount, that actually may help not only us, but us connect and be better stewards to the rest of life.
And I think if we open ourselves up to it, there is always communication coming from wildlife. In the more, I guess, gross level, like we started talking about, where you hear the alarm of the ravens or the birds, especially when you walk out of the house, and but there's that. But there's also this very subtle communication that we can pick up on. And it could be images, it could be just a knowing like you received. And your training in Reiki really prepared you for that.
Yeah, mom opened a door for me that I'm very grateful for. And it's not just, Reiki's good and all, but it didn't work for everything. And it's things are way more expansive than that. Yes, you will get images, you'll get smells that seem out of place, and these are so easy to blow off, especially when we seem to prize the loudest sounds and the brashiest colors and the most contentious interactions and so-called reality media, TV, and things like that. And that really erodes our sensitivity to those most subtle things that are most certainly there, but they just get blown over, washed out, thrown out by everything else we do. You can't tap into that stuff when you are distracted. And the animals will tell you when you're distracted. You behave like a predator. Why do the trees go to the top of the birds go to the top of the trees? It's because you are focused on something and striving for it in that way that something only does when it's going to kill another thing. You might be just going to the library. You're a vegan. You love animals. But I'm sorry, the messaging campaign you were putting off with your directed, purposeful walk, your device in your hand, your focus on what's between your ears and on the screen rather than what's around you makes you scary. You are dangerous in ways that aren't understood. I remember the first time we ever went from upstate New York down to the city, and the first time I ever saw a homeless person, and this guy was yelling and having a conversation with someone we could not see, and everybody on the sidewalk was diverting across the street to walk on the other side away from this person. That was shocking to a kid who grew up in a rural environment and never seen anything like that. But that's us. That's
Right.
us almost every day as viewed from the perspective of the rest of life. We're doing stuff that is not coherent with the rest of nature. I love the idea of friend John Young, who I mentioned earlier with the sit spot, practice and the terminology for it. He's spent time with the San Bushmen, and they have a saying that there's first and second creation. First creation is everything on Earth: humans, lions, mambas, acacia, all the plants, the fungi, everything. Second creation is everything that human beings have brought into the world. And there's no problem with first creation, they say. We know what the lion's going to do. You know what you need to do to stay safe, and you do it. You know that plant's poisonous. You know that one is a good. Hobbs is chiming in here.
Yes.
He's telling us that there's trouble. That's first creation,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But the majority of the problems in life that we encounter are second creation. There are the toxic compounds that we put into the water so we can't drink it. They're pick your item, pick your topic, pick your list. They are made out of a disconnect between what is viable with first creation and what's not.
I love that. That's wonderful way to frame it. It is so true. As we wrap up, I want to make sure that everyone knows about your book, Eavesdropping with Animals. But I also noticed that you have an online self-study course that you offer to get
Yes.
people more intimate into their relationship.
Yeah, we do. Thanks for mentioning it. It's kind of the next step from the book. The book's kind of the entree and catalyzer, for the nature curious or even not. I hope it honors my grandfather enough with its storytelling that it's interesting enough for folks who this isn't quite their thing anyway, but good art always appeals to everyone. So I tried my best with literary work to do some of that. But the online course, is really a lot more nuts and bolts of like, do this, look for this, listen to this, try this, be mindful of these things as you go forward. And it's really helped a lot of people.
So that's available on your website, which will be below in the description. And I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your experience with Reiki. I know a lot of people, we need to normalize these really deep, intimate relationships that we have with nature. And I think maybe your second book might be about that. If Eavesdropping was the entree, then you're going to go
I think
even
it'll be a
deeper
little bit
with...
before I write another book, to be honest, but
True. It just came out, right? It just came out. Was it October?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Best of luck to you and Jenny.
Thanks.
And
Maureen.
your family. I love Yellowstone. I look forward to coming back. It is a magical place, but as you reminded us, the magic is just outside our door. And when I go out today to the post office, I'm going to crack the door open very slowly. My husband's going to say, "What's wrong with..."
Listen to the podcast, then you'll know.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, George. It's been such a pleasure and really heartwarming, amazing stories. I am just so grateful for your presence today.
Thank you, Maureen, and have a great day.
Thank you for being a part of the Enchanted Earth podcast. Comment below, share, and most of all, please hit the subscribe button so that you'll hear when we publish another inspiring episode. You can visit us at luminous-spaces.com for more information on our online courses, retreats, and offerings. Thank you and have a magical day.